Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Simply Put, where we take the news and explain it in a way that is simply put. We have a very big breaking story that I really just felt obligated to cover just because of how insane it feels. So basically, a special counsel report from the Department of Justice was just released earlier today, and it called into question President Joe Biden's mental acuity. So in this video, we are going to quickly cover why the special counsel was formed, what the report actually says about Biden's cognitive ability, Biden's response, because he did respond and he responded very quickly, and what this means just in a broader political context. So we'll just get started right away. If you don't follow the news too much, you might be like, wait, what's special counsel? Which honestly, if that's the case, I kind of envy you. But basically, to make a long story short, Joe Biden had kept classified documents at his residence in Delaware, and because of this, there was basically just a special counsel that was formed by the Department of Justice to look into how it was handled and see if there was any negligence or any issues that would implicate Biden in any number of crimes. So it released its findings earlier today that said no charges should be brought against him, which you would think, oh, that's a good thing for Biden. But then when you actually look at what all the headlines said and what the report actually said, it paints a substantially worse picture for Joe Biden. So I'm just going to read some quotes from a Politico article here. So in the report, Special Counsel Robert Hur, a well-respected former U.S. attorney, explained that the president's, quote, lapses in attention and vigilance demonstrate why former officials should not keep classified materials unsecured at home and read them aloud to others, but jurors could well conclude that Mr. Biden's actions were unintentional. And that he said that Biden's team would make a defense that many jurors would find sympathetic. And the main quote that is especially damning, right? There's actually a few other quotes, but the real one that sticks out at first is that, quote, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. And then additionally, it goes on to give some examples of why they would go on to say this. So for one, apparently during a interview that took place in October, Biden was not able to recall when he was vice president. And also apparently, and this is the really damning one, he was not able to describe within a time period of describe accurately when his son died. His son Bo did pass away, and he was apparently not able to recall when exactly that happened. And then additionally, another quote from her says that apparently he appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him, and that he said that he predicted that Biden's attorneys would, quote, emphasize these limitations in his recall if they were called upon him to defend him in trial. So incredibly damning for the Department of Justice to say of the current sitting president that he is not able to recall when he was vice president, and that he was not able to recall when his son died, and basically just saying that he is an old man with a really bad memory, and that the jury would feel bad for him, if anything. So these are incredible accusations from this special counsel, and the Biden team was very quick to respond. One of the attorneys of his on the case said that, quote, they trashed the subject of an investigation, and they basically were just kind of criticizing the professionalism of the report, and we're saying that it was very slanted because just the way that it read just seemed to be very, at least in their view, seemed to be very hostile and negative in how they were painting him. I mean, at least in my opinion, based on what they're saying, it just seems like they were kind of saying they were repeating what Biden said, and it's not exactly their fault that Biden just cannot remember when he was vice president. But at 7:45 p.m. on February 8th, he actually gave a press conference, which is fascinating just because he normally just stays out of the limelight a lot, which I'll get to more later. But he gave a press conference basically talking about the statement and also defending his mental faculties. And during the press conference, he had a lot of energy, was very angry, very just aggressive and offensive against all the reporters' questions that were asked, just very snippy. He was asked, why should he run again when he's said previously that many other Democrats could beat Donald Trump. He said, quote, I am the most qualified for the job and I will finish what we started. And then on the topic of forgetting, when his son died, he said, how in the hell dare he raise that? So just very, very aggressive. But one of the main headlines from this press conference, because there was a lot of pressure on Biden at this point to make sure he got through this without slipping up, without making any gaffes, because he's been known to make gaffes pretty regularly for the last few years. And now that he's being actively called into question by a special counsel with the Department of Justice, definitely got to be on your A game. And despite that, he did end up making one mistake that a lot of the people in his opposing party will absolutely run with. He ended up mixing up the president of Egypt and Mexico. He was talking a bit about the foreign policy just situation happening in the Middle East right now between Israel and Gaza. And he accidentally referred to the president of Mexico as El Sisi, which is the president of Egypt. So overall, just really, really not that good of a look for Joe Biden. So the reason why I wanted to cover this was really just because this is just such an uncharted situation, and just I can't wrap my head around the president being just painted so negatively by his own Justice Department. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was I was following the New York Times reporting on all of this as it was happening. And something that Maggie Haberman said, who's someone who worked at the New York Times, said, "It's hard to see how this helped Biden's political case. Several Democratic operatives have sent panic texts about how that press conference went." So if behind the scenes Democratic operatives are freaking out about how this looked, then that obviously is not a good sign, if that's what the internal machinations kind of are. And he already for years, as I kind of mentioned before, he's been hounded by accusations of cognitive decline. And the fact that he very rarely does public facing interviews is kind of a symptom, or is kind of shows that in practice. Like there is a annual Super Bowl interview that the president will give right before the Super Bowl. And for 2 years in a row, Joe Biden has refused to do it. So with that being the case, and on top of the fact he just hasn't really done many other interviews, on top of all the clips on social media of him just making mistakes, just really just comes at a terrible time for the president. And additionally, I actually reported this in the last video I did, polling from a few weeks ago, around mid-January or so, found that the overwhelming majority of Americans already view Biden as too old. 70% of respondents and around half of Democrats agreed with a statement that Biden should not seek re-election. And a big part of that was because of his mental faculties. And the one thing that I knew immediately the second that this news broke was that Republicans now have an insanely fantastic amount of ammunition to attack Joe Biden with. I mean, you could already make the case that they did on this front, but now that this is just such a recent thing, and the fact that the Justice Department reported on it gives them a substantial amount of room to just attack him relentlessly for this. So Trump campaign advisors are already seizing on the fact that he mixed up the Egyptian president as the head of Mexico. And additionally, Carrie Lake, who is a staunch Trump supporter and ran for Senate and lost in the state of Arizona, said, quote, "Are we supposed to be sympathetic to the fact that the man who possesses the nuclear codes is too old to know right from wrong?" And then additionally, 4 top House Republicans, led by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, said in a statement, quote, "A man too incapable of being held accountable for mishandling classified information is certainly unfit for the Oval Office." So the fact, again, there's just a lot of room for attacks on him now, even more than before. And this already comes at the time when Biden is already down in the polls. In several states like Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin, he's already down by quite a few points. And these are states that he won in 2020. So he really is not in the best position right now. And he is already the least popular president since Jimmy Carter. And in case you're not a history buff, Jimmy Carter did end up losing after one term. So Dems, at this point, Democrats, only really like Joe Biden because he is the only option remaining against Trump. Definitely, this is the most lesser of two evils election we maybe have ever had. And again, there are 9 months until the election at this point, so really anything could happen. But the criticism of his age has gotten more valid. So one thing that I thought was very interesting was I've heard some just like people chatting about like, is Biden still going to even be the nominee at this point? Are they going to try to swap him out if he's already just kind of looking like such a wounded candidate this far out? And there's no way to know for sure. So I'm just going to make the case kind of in both directions, and you can kind of make a conclusion for yourself. Because honestly, I I think making any bold sweeping claims about it either way is just not really, just doesn't really make sense to me, because so much could happen. News could break tomorrow that completely invalidates everything that I've said in this video. So we really don't know. But the case for him not being the nominee is that he is very unpopular, and all the Democrats right now see Trump as this very profound threat on democracy. They're afraid he'll act like a dictator. They're afraid that he's going to go after political rivals. And I mean, you could agree or disagree on, how accurate those claims are, but that's up to you. But I think some people in the establishment of the Democratic Party could just see him as too wounded and not want to risk it. And they could try to prop up Kamala Harris, who is already not really popular, so I don't think that's a good idea. But at this point, he has 9 months to not make any more big mistakes in public. And, as the election gets closer, he's going to need to be in public more. So the odds of him making more mistakes are going to rise. And the thing I'm thinking is just that who is really going to be the one to decide whether he will run or not. It really comes down to him and the people in his circle. And it really just, if enough people in his circle tell him that he can't run, then maybe he would step aside. Maybe if a really bad gaffe happens in the future, maybe he'll be forced to, or maybe not forced to, but maybe he'll just feel like that's what's necessary. But considering the fact that he is still sticking to his guns now, I think it would take a massive mental lapse for something like that to happen. That being said, it is possible. And then the case for him being the nominee, I think it really comes down to the fact that in terms of the primary election, Biden is basically guaranteed to be the nominee at this point. There's only 9 months to the election, and is it even really possible in terms of the timeline for him to even be swapped out if they don't start acting immediately? And obviously this looked really bad for him, but is this even bad? Will they consider this bad enough for them to start that process now? And then additionally, I think another factor to consider is I really struggle to see any Democrat openly challenge him now, with just how high the stakes are. And then also in a more cynical sense, the fact that these people's political ambitions and presidential ambitions and just careers in general would probably be over if they attack Joe Biden and then Joe Biden continues to just run, and then everyone will just blame him for, oh, you're helping Trump, or blame them for helping Trump. And it would just look really bad for them. So I really think the only way that you'd be able to get a massive group of Democrats together to be like, we don't want this guy to be the nominee, elected Democrats rather, it would require a absolutely unprecedented backlash. And again, 9 months before the election, I don't know how feasible that is. And then the other factor to consider is that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, they have a lot of influence on the process, obviously, and Biden obviously has a lot of influence on them. So in turn, are we really expecting them to exactly go against Biden? Probably not. So it really could go either way. I have no idea. You held a gun to my head. I'd say maybe he would. I can't. I honestly, I don't want to make any predictions, so I won't. And then one thing that I think could be really interesting to factor in is that there's been talk of just third parties running in general. And I don't necessarily think that they have much of a chance anyway, but I could see more and more people seeing things like this and just slowly getting turned off from Biden. So it could strengthen third parties. I know Robert Kennedy Jr., he's someone who's running, and he's gotten anywhere between like 5 and 20% in polls, which is definitely at least somewhat significant. And then additionally, there's this one group called No Labels, which is trying to run a centrist candidate and get a centrist to run. And perhaps if Biden just continues to have more and more gaffes, No Labels will just be like, all right, we got to put up our person because it's clear that Biden's not equipped to do it. So that being said, that's really just the whole situation right now. There's a lot of moving parts here. It could very easily evolve into something much more inflated than it is right now. But that being said, I appreciate you watching. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.